What is up, everyone? Matt McKeever here, and I'm really excited today to have Kayla from Ontario Landlord Watch just come and talk to us about exactly what's going on these days in regards to being a landlord and investor, and really just what's going on with the province, the Landlord Tenant Board, and just even rent striking and all that. I know that my audience has a ton of questions about this, Kayla. Do you mind, I guess, one, thank you for taking the time to join us here, but two, what's your perspective? What's going on, and what should we as investors and landlords be doing?
Well, one, we obviously see a lot of relief that's coming to every different type of sector in Ontario based on the COVID-19 and what's happening. As everyone knows, as soon as this started, it was our elected officials coming out and telling people, hey, don't worry about rent. Don't worry, you're not going to get evicted. This is going to be something where, they gave everyone the assurance that no one's going to get evicted. So now everyone thinks, okay, I don't have to pay my rent. And that's why we now have a growing movement of people now trying to not pay their rent. So the money that comes from the government right now through the relief programs, people are like, don't give it to your landlord. And that's why more of the landlords need to be concerned about it, but also the taxpayers should be concerned about this as well.
Yeah. And so, I know that unfortunately we had some politicians at the start, especially a month ago. I think one of the big problems is it's an unusual circumstance, right? And there's a lot of uncertainty and volatility going on. And our leaders don't even really know how to react either. And I think they're kind of looking over their shoulder just to see how everyone else reacts. And that's kind of dictating the sort of messaging and even the sort of solutions they're putting together, it feels like at this point.
Oh, definitely. If you see that the way that the commercial side of it, they have came out with, there's a lockout, there's a time frame of a lockout for the commercial units. And that's why the pressure had to build and enough where people are now going to be evicted out of their commercial rental units. So they came out with 4 months of commercial relief, but they didn't come out with any type of relief that was coming from the residential side of it, even though there is rent banks for different agencies that are all over Ontario based on the regions. And they would normally help people for rent arrears and last month's rent deposits. They've actually hold off on giving rent arrear relief from these agencies, but they're still giving out last month's rent deposits for the actual for last month's rent deposits. So it's like you want to go ahead and give last month's rent deposit, but you're holding off on the relief, and this is where we're now a little irritated. The funds are there and they're not giving it to us.
So what should landlords or investors be doing right now? And do you have any recommendations if they find themselves on the wrong end of a rent strike?
Well, my best tip to the landlords out there is that you really got to understand your tenants. Where they work, making sure that as their hours get cut, do they get completely laid off, making sure that you're giving them the links to the different type of relief plans, and then make sure that you have a document in place, giving it to your landlord or giving it to your tenant to say, hey, I understand you're going through these type of financial hardship right now. This is what we are willing to do to try to, work out a payment arrangement. So this way you can show the interaction that you're trying to work with your tenant. And if they don't get that paper back to you with some type of payment plan, or it shows that they're not willing to work with you. So when the landlord and tenant board opens up, when that happens, if it happens, then you can kind of show your history of going back and forth with your tenants to say that you've been trying to work with them. Because what's going to happen, what could potentially happen, is that when the landlord and tenant board does open up, they might just put that tenant on a payment plan. And how much of our landlords can actually hold on to those rental properties knowing that they just went so long without any rental funds, and now they're going through a payment plan that could take 12, 18 months. This is what our main issue. The landlord and tenant board is not going to be able to hold on or be able to keep up with the type of applications that are coming through the landlord and tenant board, because they couldn't even keep up before that. The landlord and tenant board was in crisis before the pandemic, and now it's in chaos.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Before we start talking about the chaos, I just want to reiterate the point Kayla made there. I think this is the time to really double down on communications with tenants. Take a proactive approach, reach out, figure out exactly where they are and what they're kind of expecting so that we can manage our expectations and try and come up with, alternative solutions that will work for everyone. But it is really important to not take a wait and see approach. I think this is the time to be very proactive as a real estate investor or landlord. So talking about some of the chaos that's going on, let's talk about the chaos that was the landlord tenant board before COVID-19 even happened. And then you can maybe tell us about what sort of crazy situation you think we're going to walk into once they eventually do reopen it.
Well, the landlord and tenant board was getting in so many type of applications. There's about over 80,000 applications that are being brought to the landlord and tenant board prior to this pandemic. There was over 58,423 applications that were for non-payment rent. And we kept on coming up with different alternatives, different solutions that the government can do to reform the landlord and tenant board to make it run more efficiently than what it was. We had our concept of, why are we paying $110,000 salaries for adjudicators to listen to hearing cases for non-payment of rent when that $110,000 could actually go towards the subsidy that is needed for these tenants? You know, we have so many applications that are being heard by an adjudicator. Meanwhile, it should be heard through maybe a mediator, and getting mediation to the landlord and the tenant prior to even having to go to a hearing date would be more beneficial than having an adjudicator listening to that actual case. But when we put that type of solution forth to the government, they were listening, but they threw it into the mess. They didn't replace, you know, non-payment of rent being heard by an adjudicator with mandatory mediation to kind of have, they just threw mediation in there. So that was with Bill 184. So if you got to listen to Bill 184 or read it, you're looking at the concept that it was more penalties for the landlords who are out there, you know, trying to take over their unit for their own personal use, or for the landlords who are like, okay, massive renovations are needed, we need to evict in order to complete these type of renovations. They now just put those fines up. It used to be $25,000 fine for an unlawful eviction. Now they've pushed that to $50,000, and it was $100,000 for a commercial, and now it's gone up to $250,000. So you can see a lot of it's through punishment, but it's not understanding what the real issues are. Why would someone want to take over a rental for their own personal use? Well, because of the RTA and the LTB. This is why they're getting out of the game instead of getting into the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we talk maybe a little bit about what should landlords currently be doing if they find their tenant is unable to pay? Should they be filing an N4? I've heard a lot of different opinions and what I consider to be some misinformation on the subject. So I'd love to hear your perspective, Kayla.
My perspective would be giving the N4 like normal and making sure that you're only giving one for that time period, tracking if they give you any type of payments, because normally what happens when you give an N4, you actually have a certain time frame that you have to work with before you apply to the landlord tenant board. So there's an expiry on that N4. So that's what we're a little concerned with, because if you're giving your N4 now on April 1st, and you have 30 days to file to the landlord tenant board, and if you don't do that because everything is closed, is those forms still going to be valid when the landlord tenant board opens up? So we still want to follow our protocol, still give those N4 notices, and sometimes that N4 notice can help them when it comes down to when the social agencies such as Lutherwood, sometimes it's Ontario Works, but they will then release some funds to keep the people out of the eviction process and keep them in their homes. That N4 notice might be beneficial for them. And it's a part of what we're doing to advocate at the provincial level, is to say through this pandemic and how people are needing rent subsidy, maybe a new N4 application should be created in a where that I give the tenant an N4, here's the amount owing, the tenant will sign on one side of it, the landlord will sign on the other, and then the landlord can give that document to the government in order to receive the funds. Because right now we're getting different type of funds coming from the emergency relief, but we have people who are paying, which are great, and a lot of the tenants are paying right now. But as things tend to unroll, we might see more people not be paying their rent. So this is more about getting the money directly to the landlord and get these people on a great track so that they don't fall into the eviction process when everything does come back to life.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. What else should landlords and investors be aware of or be paying attention to right now?
You have to be calling. You have to be calling the Minister of Housing. You have to call his assistant, Parham Gill. You have to be calling your local MPP to tell them like how you're experiencing. A lot of landlords in our group, they would be like, hey, Kayla, can we have like a generic letter that we can send to our MPP? And I tell them initially what we were doing was that generic letter, but now that's not what we need. They need to see personalized letters sent to their elected officials to say, this is what's happening. We've contacted a lawyer, but no one really knows where to kind of go with this because it's what is in the Municipal Act, what's in the RTA, it's technically law. But the way that the government is treating the small landlords, when we contribute 50% of this housing stock throughout of Canada, it's very disheartening, and to see that they're not going to be increasing the supply. And they would, right before this pandemic, they would say, hey, this is a landlord and tenant board issue. There's a housing crisis. This is not a housing crisis, affordable housing crisis. This is a supply and demand issue. And that's what we're trying to show them, that as we can get more investors into our business of rental properties, you would see the type of supply that is needed, and that will fluctuate with the way that the rents are. Because people are saying now, the rents are going to go low, and I'm like, no, the rents are going to go higher after this pandemic to try to recoup the cost of what people had lost. So we have to get ourselves very embedded into politics very heavily if you're in this industry, because it's so heavily controlled by the provincial government that you need to be a part of what's happening, and in order to fight back. And that's why they see landlords were too scattered. We have small landlord associations that are nonprofit at a municipal level. We have big lobby groups that really benefit bigger landlords. But that's why Ontario Landlords Watch and Ontario Landlords United, which is our council that we created, we're now wanting to be that big lobby group for the small and pop landlords, because we are the solution to the housing industry of the housing crisis. But they have to listen to our concerns and get us what we need, because right now we have a tool bag and there's no tools inside of it. And that's why they're seeing these type of these effects that they're currently experiencing now through the homelessness issue that they have. I don't know if you've seen it today, but they have Toronto Housing, and they're now clearing out rooms, they're now painting, and they're moving homeless people into these units. We're like, where are these units even empty? So you got to see that, they're even taking over hotels and putting people in from the homeless shelters into hotels so that we can get the social distancing happening, so it's not spreading, and they're able to flatten the curve. And that's where, again, this is our past problems biting the government in the ass this time around, because they have done nothing about it prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, it really unusual times we find ourselves in. And I think it is really important for us as landlords to take ownership, like you were saying, and really, reach out to the people that can actually influence the laws, right? And that's kind of why you started Ontario Landlords Watch in the first place. Do you mind maybe just going into a little bit more about what this community is all about, and, why you're raising the banner and flag for landlords?
So we started off in 2010 when the city of Cambridge made landlords responsible for tenants' delinquent utility bills. And at that time, I'm like, how is that even just? Like, I bought this unit, it's supposed to be plus utilities. That's why it was very appealing to me. And now you're telling me if my tenants default, I now have to pay for it. So we end up I had to call landlords from Kijiji, and I said, hi, I'm calling about your semi. I'm not calling to rent it. I just want to let you know that when you do rent it, that tenant's water bill, if they don't pay it, it's going to go to your property taxes. And so that's how it was formed, of us fighting our municipal government regarding water billing, which that has spread across many different municipalities since 2010. Then we started getting landlord licensing. So as we got a petition ready to go for both licensing and water billing, we had more letters and emails coming to us saying, hey, can you fight the Residential Intensity Act and Landlord and Tenant Board? And you get to see what type of tenants are out there and how they really abuse the landlord, and they take advantage, and they put these landlords in bankruptcy because of the way that the laws are created in order to protect the tenant. And if you look at any type of policies that are out there, all of the tenants are being protected. They're being protected through property standards. They're being protected through the Residential Intensity Act and Landlord and Tenant Board. And if they do have any type of maintenance concerns, they can always go to their MPP or their city councilor. Landlords are just, we have to make sure that we have our paralegal and we're filing with the Landlord and Tenant Board. And when before the pandemic, people are waiting 7 months up to a year on a normal day before a pandemic to get an eviction, it's not called for. This is where landlords are paying for a service. They're not getting the service that they're paying for, and landlords are not getting access to justice. With our tenants, they can get free legal aid. Landlords don't. So they always have this all landlords are rich and all tenants are poor situation. And this is why they keep putting that into getting the tenants more protection when they really don't need it. And this is what some landlords, you need to pay attention to Bill 184, because they actually want to keep a database of landlords who are using the N12 and the N13 notices and bringing it to the Landlord and Tenant Board and going to hold it as a database to see which landlords could be abusing the N12 and the N13s. And we're going, well, are you going to create a database of tenants who are abusing the N4? You know, this is the main problem. And if you look at all of the applications, the non-payment of rent is exactly the problem that's bogging down the Landlord and Tenant Board. So they have to have a system that's in place to really analyze, one, does a tenant need to be on, social housing and need to be in social housing, or do they just need rent subsidy? And how can you get the rent subsidy to them where they're not going to abuse it, and it gets it to the landlord and keeps them from tapping into those funds and getting themselves into an eviction process. But we had to pull ourselves together through a landlord group on Facebook in order to know when things are happening. We have a way to connect to the members to inform them of what's happening, and especially meeting with you, Matt, like having your members, getting them out there and getting them fighting. It's about putting like the Batman signal out there and telling our landlords we have to get loud and we have to do it now, because this could be very catastrophic as each month goes by, as we still have our restrictions of social distancing in place.
Yeah, really well said, Kayla. And I just wanted to kind of re-emphasize, it's really unfortunate the narrative that often politicians and other community organizers want to make, where they're constantly trying to pair landlords versus tenants, rather than understanding that we really do need to work together. And that when you create too much of a power imbalance, it ruins the system for everyone. So by giving too much power to the tenants, it actually does good tenants a disservice. Because what that ends up doing is it means bad tenants can stay in units longer, they can do more damage, which keeps that unit from becoming available for a good tenant, someone that's going to come in and pay, someone that's going to respect the asset. And it's important to understand that landlords and tenants, they're both just made up of humans. There's no such thing as like all landlords are evil or all tenants are evil. It's just they're all made up of people. Some people do bad things, some people do good things. And again, it's really dangerous when the media and politicians want to get into this narrative of saving tenants from evil landlords, or that all landlords are greedy, rich, SOBs. It's really unfortunate, especially during these trying times. I think that we're seeing that social fabric get pulled on even more than anything we've seen in the past. And like Kayla was saying, it's really important that we take ownership as landlords now and stand up and start really making our voices heard. Because that's the only way the politicians are going to react, right? Is when they think votes are on the line.
It's about the votes. It's the power of people behind it. It's about motivation of organizations who have money to fund their campaign. It's actually pretty, right now with everything that's happening, it's like they come out and they say that food trumps rent. It's like, okay, are you going to be getting more votes now because you're appealing to the tenant side, that you're telling them, don't worry, you're not getting evicted. They're saying you're not getting evicted right now. Are they going to say that you're not going to get it evicted when the Landlord and Tenant Board opens up? And then when it does, how does that look? We've been really advocating to have more telephone type of hearings in order to get these type of these cases heard quickly, and that you didn't have to wait for an adjudicator to come to different type of municipalities. But because of everything on hold, a lot of tenants are now at the point where they're extorting their landlords and being like, you want me to leave because you want to move back into it? All right, I want $20,000. And landlords are so desperate that they would rather take that in order for them potentially to want to sell their property. So it's getting out of hand. But again, this is about the government making private landlords doing the government's job.
Mm-hmm.
So if they look at what housing is and housing being a human right, they want to see how they can get away with by making landlords deal with people who technically would be in the system or would be in motels that taxpayers have to pay for. And that's why it's going to cost them. And what I really find odd is that, our elected officials from federal, provincial, and municipal had funded a unit, a big building out in Kitchener for 48 units. And that's $264,000 a unit based on 12.7% for this 48 unit building. And the land was gifted to the developer from a church. Now, if you gave private homeowners, say if you, Matt, you get $70,000, create a secondary suite in your unit. The only thing is you have to keep it a rental unit. We're not going to tell you how much to rent it for. We're not going to give you any guidelines. We're not going to tell you who you should put in it, but you have to keep it a rental. You could create 181 units with that type of money. And you now created income, secondary income for 181 homeowners. Why would they want to be continuing to create properties that way when they could be moving with private homeowners and giving people secondary incomes?
Yeah, I love it. That's a great solution and great recommendation. If people want to get more involved with you and Ontario Landlords Watch, what's the best way to reach out, get connected, all that great stuff?
So we're on Facebook group. It's Ontario Landlords Watch members. In the comments, there's about 3 questions that we'll ask. Make sure that it says, how did you find out about us? Make sure that you heard us on Matt McKeever's channel, and so that way we can get you into the group a lot quicker. We do have 1,500 people still waiting to get into it. As you can tell, it's through a pandemic. We're trying the best to really screen the people that we're trying to get into the group, because it's a community, and you'll know when you get in there of who we are and how we do our Facebook lives. This is pretty cool, Matt. You're excited again by showing me all these features on here. And you'll know who these people are, and we're coming together as that community because we're teaching you, how to contact your MPP, the Minister of Housing. We're teaching you what to say, and most importantly, we're talking to our members to say what are your issues and what are your solutions. So we're able to take that and put it into a report. So as we go to our elected officials, we're not coming with complaints. We're coming with real solutions that protect the landlords, it protects the tenant, and it also protects the taxpayers' money. But we have to see that why are they still wanting to keep this homelessness going? They pay so much money for these service managers who are getting $96,000 a year to create programs that are not even working. Their first program was to give homeowners $25,000 to create secondary suites. But you had a guideline on how much the rent would be, and there is a stipulation of who could be accepted into that unit. So we're like, well, that is not a program that we want. And if you see now, you'll probably get a letter very shortly from your municipality. They're actually asking private investors to open their empty units to people who are currently waiting on the housing waiting list for social housing, or people who are currently in shelters. And landlords are like, sorry, no. We're not doing it, not because we're heartless people. We're doing it because the Residential Intensive Act and the Landlord and Tenant Board rules are still in place. And for the simple fact that we've been trying to get change to give landlords some protection, and it's been falling on their deaf ears. So they got to know the private investors, as you can tell, are the solution. They're really trying to work with us, but now the landlords are going, no, we had enough. You need to do something for us before we can do something for you. And that's why our report, it really opened up the doors for people who are struggling to get into housing. And after this pandemic, it's going to be very hard for people to get accepted into rental units for the simple fact that the screening is going to be tighter than ever before. And unless these tenants can show that they were able to pay their rent through this pandemic, I can't really see that their application be at the top of the pile.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where all these unintended consequences of the good intentions of the government really start to spotlight the inefficiencies and the focus on headlines rather than actual results for everyone. Yeah, I love it, Kayla. It's always a pleasure just kind of getting to catch up with you and hear what's going on with Ontario Landlords Watch. Any last things before we wrap up this call?
We need everyone calling the Parm Guild, the assistant to the Minister of Housing. We need everyone calling the Minister of Housing themselves. We're not going to see the type of changes that we really want to see, the ones that we've created right now through the pandemic. That is okay. We can handle that. But what we need to be advocating for in a way to help our tenants as well is for a rent subsidy, but a rent subsidy where our landlords are able to apply for those funds themselves and not have it in the hands of their landlords. But we have to get on the phone. Sometimes it's great for an email, but you know what? Sometimes it's easy for them just to say next or delete. We need to get these people on the phone, and we're hoping to actually put our invitation out to have these elected officials potentially on Zoom so that we can start having them a part of our discussion, be like, what is the next steps? Because what you're doing, you're destroying the current housing stock, and you're destroying the housing stock now for the future. So if you want to protect it, we invite them to a Zoom meeting to be able to hash out what is needed now and what's going to be needed in the weeks to come.
Awesome. Love it. Thanks again, Kayla. And we need to do these calls more often. Thanks.
You get me. I get excited. It's out of all these years of us advocating, like we're just seeing more and more people get the concept and know what they need to do to help. And that's why we have a council that we're putting together to really take our advocacy efforts to the next level. But it can't be just Kayla anymore calling the elected officials. We want to teach all the members, all the listeners about what they need to do. And together we become that strong voice for the housing industry.
Absolutely love it. So for everyone watching this right now, no excuses. You're probably sitting at home. You've got more free time than you've had in the past. So let's do it. Let's reach out. Let's make sure those politicians really do understand our perspective as landlords.
Perfect.